anyway, I just want to say hi again to you both, Chloe and Siobhan. And yeah, it was like we were talking about, I had this thought of like, wouldn't it be fun to talk about all this together? I know we don't get to spend the daily life together in the same place, but I know we do similar work and think about similar things and share a community together, and just got excited to, yeah, to see where our minds and hearts went, if we tried to actually put words to some of the things that are really hard to put words to. I'm kind of curious, like, maybe we just say where we're sitting right now. Where are we? Yeah, I'm at my home at Gateway right now, and I'm actually really grateful for the sunshine. Um, and it's coming in this window right now. So I'm in the Taylor Creek watershed, which is a little southeast of Asheville, Black Mountain, and Earth Haven has been around for, gosh, almost 3 decades, and we're in an area that has been stewarded and lived on by the Cherokee and the Catawba, probably before records were made. So I'm grateful to call this home, and yeah, to share this home with my sweetheart and friends in this neighborhood and valley. Yeah.
I'm just over the mountain in the Ivy Creek watershed here in the little town of Barnardsville, about 25 minutes north of Asheville, also on unceded territory of Aniwaya, Chalagis, Cherokee people, and Yuchi and Catawba folks and others have lived here, have stewarded this place, and are still around. And I'm here in this sweet little homestead of my friend and colleague, Natalie Bogwalker, also the campus of Wild Abundance, the school that I've been working for and that she founded. And I'm looking at a very enormous elderberry bush that's heavy with purple fruit.
Mm-hmm.
The autumn light of the afternoon. And yeah, also feeling grateful to be here.
And I'm Siobhan, here also across the ridge from both of you in Weaverville, and I am visiting a friend here. So I'm in the homestead of a dear one, surrounded by such green. I live in Colorado, in the mountains outside of Lyons, Colorado, the traditional land of the Ute and Arapaho and Cheyenne, and yeah, so it's such a contrast to be in so many shades and textures of green. Um, Such a delight for the eyes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here in this time zone with us and back where I met you, in coming out to ritual here and celebration. And it's interesting that I think the three of us have gotten to be together in some of those rituals that are kind of tying together this idea, this not just an idea, but a linguistic handle, belonging and reconnection and belonging to place. And it seems to be a throughway and like lifeline and thread in a lot of different areas in our lives. And I'm kind of curious, like, to each of you, like, how is your life shaped that is with this, that it's underpinning, or like a current or a driving force? Like, how does it show up in how you show up, I guess is my question. Like,
Mm.
yeah, in a way that's like not in a program. It's like, like, why is your life the way it is if it is connected with um, and driven by these things that I know we've devoted a lot of time to be in service to in group settings. I'm just curious. Yeah.
Mm.
What are the practices? Why is it valuable?
Well, I'm not sure if I shared my name earlier. My name is Chloe, and I want to share something that I'm excited about right now in that realm that I feel like speaks to that question. Let me see how much background to give, but so I'm a parent. I have a 6-year-old child and another parent who I've been raising my child with and her child alongside mine, called us together for a conversation about rites of competence,
Mm-hmm.
which um, are, yeah, just acknowledging the transition from early to middle childhood, acknowledging and welcoming children into competency and participation in the community, and kind of both acknowledging and also encouraging them to show up with more competency and capacity to participate in the collective. And so we had some meetings with many people in a really beautiful way, many people who haven't given birth to children, but are mentors and holding the community space of raising children. And lots of different ideas emerged, lots of grief and sadness emerged. And one thing that was a theme was just like getting together regularly. You know, folks shared about their imperfect rites of passage through mostly church communities. And they were like, yeah, there were a lot of things about that didn't feel great, the structure and the dogma, but we saw each other every week. You know, these were people I didn't necessarily even like that much, but they saw me every week and we witnessed each other's lives. And so from that came this idea of having a monthly story sharing gathering. Super simple, like light a fire. We've been actually just having candles because it's been so hot in the summer. Anybody's welcome. Share personal stories, share made-up stories, share old, big mythologic stories. We kind of have some themes that we're working with. Bring a blanket, bring a snack. Super simple. And we've done 3 of them. And it just feels so alive. And everybody has so much fun. And it's so simple. And so for me, that came to my mind because it's something that's I'm actively tending right now. It's kind of being birthed in our community. And I'm so drawn to these places where we're not like stepping outside of our lives into a program or a class or like a retreat, although those are all wonderful, where we're just like gently and in a really doable and accessible way, weaving simple ritual of togetherness into our lives. And then even just the second one, it's like, oh, the children are acting out the stories. You know, somebody brought a bunch of Asian pears that they had harvested and everyone was snacking on these Asian pears. And somebody had the idea of exchanging children's books that you've like read a million times and want to change. So just these emergent ways that almost like if you've ever made like rock candy or crystals, it's like you put the thread down and then the crystals form on the thread. So creating those simple structures that then organically, these ways that we're naturally inclined to connect with each other and the rest of the living world can kind of happen without a lot of effort and like cognitive planning. So yeah, that's just like one example of something that's alive in my present moment life and is feeling really sweet and really simple and fairly easy, which is wonderful because life can get really busy and complex, and just sitting around a fire telling stories and laughing is like such good medicine.
Yeah, I love when people ask about sustainability and what's sustainable. I'm like, what's sustainable is what you can manage, like what we can do. So I love just hearing like, this is working. Yeah.
I love hearing you speak, Chloe, about what is happening with you and your little one and in the community with the storytelling circle. And I feel like when I come to this area, I feel a real cultural revolution in that way of people just coming together, doing very simple things to weave ritual and togetherness and meaning and really ask important questions together too. I feel like that's a real important piece of the weaving is like, how do we create a vital culture, a generative culture? How do we do that together? And I feel that happening here in a way that I haven't felt in other places that I've lived. And so a lot with your question, NikiAnne, of like how my life has been shaped. I loved just imagining the shape of my life and feeling how in some ways it's from the poverty of not having a lot of that togetherness, you know, in my life. And really being born half Persian, there was a lot of togetherness in growing up. And then coming into the world and feeling just the isolation that has really, I feel like, been created by living in a culture that was born out of capitalism, with trying to isolate and separate because you make more money that way. How to reignite that kind of, that this is a collective, that we are an organism that is working together. And so everywhere I go and all of the work that I do in the world, is that's kind of at the heart of it, is who what is possible as a collective. Even some of the facilitation work that I've been doing, really exploring that idea of people coming in, and it's a very extractive, people come to these events feeling like they're going to get something out of it for them, and realizing that a lot of people haven't had the modeling to really understand that by feeding the village heart, that they actually receive something. And so that there's this kind of reciprocity and listening and attunement that just happens when we're feeding what lives at the center. And in terms of belonging, I feel like that's actually what creates belonging, is when we really understand that it's not about us. it's about something much bigger, and that thing that we are feeding then feeds all of us individually as well. So it's both the individual and the collective experience. So but yeah, I feel like my life has been shaped out of really feeling the poverty of the current reality that we're living in right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of you mentioned the word togetherness, and it's taking me back actually all the way to when I was a young one growing up in a big family of blood relatives with my mom, but then my dad as this cowboy. We had this whole ranching community and cow horse community, and it was so awesome in so many ways growing up. And then I got to ages where, I wanted to other it, like, yeah, this is not what I want. This is something else. I want something, whatever, big or different. And having like jettisoned myself across the country from California to Washington, D.C. for school to, I think if I look back, I was probably trying to prove something, and it was my strategy for individuation in a lot of ways. But I didn't realize I had tracked myself to be in an office in a big city, or a mid-sized to big city, most of my life, with having studied international affairs. And the image for me is a boomerang, and it's like I did have to go out, experience what I did, to then realize I want more of what I had, where I came from, and then to get to choose that consciously, to find, be with, create my daily chosen family, in addition to that blood family. And so I didn't really have community on my radar, or land-basedness initially. It was just when I looked for the next thing to experience, it happened to be a work exchange in a community that's place-based, and happens to be in Appalachia. And it just took the lid off for me of like what I didn't know I was longing for, that I so found and felt at home at when I was experiencing it. And so it's been kind of peeling the onion as I chose to come back here to live, and consciously make a choice to say, oh, I didn't know it was community. I didn't know it was being in my body on land, walking out my door to be able to go into the forest without driving in a car. But all that is a part of this sense of belonging, and consciously being in more intimate relationship with my environment. And I think I had practiced and come from a culture where it was all quite segmented and compartmentalized, and the like membrane that is all of my life here. Even it's kind of funny that I, in founding the school of integrated living, it's like I didn't really know what I was really getting myself into. And as the school has been living its namesake and its name, I'm like, oh, this integrated fabric, like it's intense. And I'm having to, and what I'm watching, those who are choosing to do this together, it's such tight proximity is learn how to be human in this relational way that's taking responsibility for ourselves and our relations in a way that we're not usually forced to these days in modern society. Like, a part of my privilege is I can move wherever I want. And so, and when I woke up to that being a shadow side of my privilege, like, it helped me to settle in. And I've been really playing with that word, settle, like, and like, I think of as a little girl, this like these stories of the settlers moving west and their covered wagons, and like, you even say it differently, like settlers, not settlers, like settlers. It's like a part of the storytelling. And then coupled with being told as a young woman, like, don't settle. And which implied in that is like, don't settle for less. And being here at Earth Haven, I just kind of put those together one day walking through Hidden Valley. I was like, oh my gosh, what if the settlers had to settle for less to settle? Like, that's inherent in rootedness, in belonging to places. You can't have it all. And so that for me has been like a liberation, because I think I was, feeling like I was chasing something in that place of like, I can go anywhere, so why not go anywhere, that was robbing me from actually belonging to place, belonging to myself, belonging to people, belonging to my relations, belonging to my mistakes. Yeah, so anyway, that plays out on the daily here. And I think it's very much a part of my conscious story of why I moved back to Earth Haven. It doesn't have to be Earth Haven, be anywhere, but why I stuck, or why I was drawing myself, it was drawing me in, was like, oh, those people who I judge as like not getting along well enough together, they're actually like still going to potluck together and going to governance meetings together and raising kids together and having businesses together. And they have so much conflict, like, but they're staying. Oh, you're my teachers. Okay. Like, and so, yeah, it's kind of embracing, the shadow sides, the messy, the ugly, the tangle, and saying, yeah, and this is a part of it. We're doing this together, as a way through to something that's tasty, fruitful, rewarding. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of just that there's can be sort of a little bit of a romanticized idea of belonging. Like, it's this feeling of like a big warm hug, or like a surprise birthday party or something. It's like, we want you, you're wanted. And of course, that's like a deep need that all of us have, and a beautiful thing. And our lives are more complex than that. And so the real work, or the multi-layered work of belonging, like as you're speaking to the shadow layers and the conflict and the dissatisfaction and the dissonance and the grief and the struggle and all of that, it's like belonging to just the fullness of reality, like being a human, being a tree, being a mountain, being in a place. It's like, it's beautiful, and it's tragic, and it's terrifying, and it's surprising, and yeah, like not picking and choosing, like, oh, I want to have a sense of belonging when it feels really warm and cozy, but then like, oh, when it gets hard, maybe I'll go over here, and just like, settling into the recognition of the fullness of being, and that's, like Siobhan was saying, like stepping outside of our own individual comfort and wants, and giving our energy to something bigger than ourselves that we may not totally understand, and yet trusting that is a pathway towards that sense of deeper belonging, which includes our wholeness.
Yeah, and I mean, you just touched on for me that thing that I keep seeing, experiencing, and also keep seeing in community and in these group facilitated spaces that I feel, so honored to be in and sometimes be facilitating, is this like such deep desire and longing to be seen, but only for certain things. Like I want to be seen and I don't want to be seen for the things that I'm really uncomfortable with. And just seeing that tension, it's holding back so many relations, so much like depth of connection, and really feeling like nourishment in our existence with others. And I think of that play on words that Tokopa Turner does in her book Belonging, of be the longing, which is two things for me. It's like, one, she's like, that thing we long for most, like I so want to be approached at a party, or given the invitation to also join to go to the river or whatever it is, to offer that to others, to like give away the thing that we long for most as a way to practice and be in an empowered like relationship with our belonging, versus this like you said, like, do you take me, and this like disempowered, like someone else has the power to say I'm in or out, and really turning that on its head. And then also the word longing, that it's a long-term relationship. And so I think that's the thing that we get tripped up on, particularly in this like soundbite, fast-paced culture that is seemingly so commonplace in how we relate, is that we're not recognizing that there's an investment needed. There's a length of time to feel that belonging, oftentimes.
I feel like belonging really sits at the center of so many conversations. So I'm grateful that you're bringing it, NikiAnne, and just it feels like the root of so many of so much of the grief, I would say, that lives in the cultural fabric right now. And it brings me back to one of the things that you said a few minutes ago about place and being a part of place. And it just reminded me of this restlessness that lives in this culture right now. And I would say that's moving across the world to around staying, just to stay in one place. And when you really begin to explore that restlessness and like what is the texture of that restlessness, I feel like it's grief. It's heartache. It's what propels us to move is one journey, and there's definitely pilgrimage, and there's that individuation and the exploration of meeting other, but we don't have like the models and the eldership, I would say, to really like go and touch our edges and then to turn back towards home and walk back with our gifts. And we don't have the village to receive us as new people carrying those new gifts and those new seeds. And so I feel like there's a real there's like a fracture there in that real guidance of kind of that mythic arc that has happened all through time, where people return home after the individuation process and really understand what it means to root and what it means to become an offering, and so I feel like the sense of belonging, it's like we don't have the structures in place that really can cultivate and build a sense of belonging. And like you said, it's like the longevity, of being somewhere long enough to understand that kind of rooting and understand that kind of, also fruiting and being the fruit and being the river that feeds a community. It's like that actually takes time to be that. So if I can just feel the grief actually in not having the elders and the village and and so having to reimagine that in our world, what that looks like when we don't have a real intact structure to hold that kind of map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of describing what I've heard Sabonfu say as her definition. I mean, I'm gonna not honor the wholeness that she holds in it, but just she's referencing that a community is the place where we're reflecting to each other's gifts, and that we're told we're invaluable and needed, not in this isolated, siloed, glorified way, but because the village, the fabric of all of life, that we're imperative to it, and that we belong in that with our unique gifts. And I'm thinking, Chloe, of the rite of competence rituals that you're doing for the young folks, that's some of the beginning of them being seen by their community. And
this is bringing up kind of like a thorny part of it all for me that I wonder if y'all have also noticed. I imagine you have there at Earth Haven, NikiAnne and Siobhan. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. But so I live in this valley and I've been here for 10 years, and there's a really sweet, it's sort of like an unintentional community. It's not like Earth Haven in that there's a lot of structure. It's kind of like a lot of different folks have moved here with some shared values, some similar interests, and it's grown up really organically. And beautiful, sweet rhythms and rituals like the ones that I shared have emerged and been tended by folks. Like time and energy for free, without money involved, has been given to the creation of these little sort of like baby sprouts, or like the beginning of a structure of something that might someday, beyond my death, resemble a village culture. And I've heard from folks who have come here in the last few years, that it feels like there's gatekeeping going on. Like it's not welcoming. Not everybody feels that way, and when I first hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, a sense of welcome and inclusion and warmth is really important to me. I like to have, many friends know, like, my door is open. If you're hungry, come to my house. I'll have something to give you to eat. Like, that's just like my nature. And I really value that. And there's also sometimes a sense of entitlement, like, oh, this is such a deep human need, such a like deficiency. It's almost like a nutrient deficiency that so many people are walking around with. And you were speaking to this poverty, Siobhan, that so many people are walking around with, that when we sniff it out, it's like, oh, I need to get some of that. And then folks can come with this sense, and I'm not saying in a shaming or blaming way. I think it's totally natural to come with a sense of like, I finally found it. Like, it's here for me. I want to lap it up. And there's a part of me that's like, yeah, it's here because we've been working on it for a decade plus. And it's not just free for the taking. It does require everybody to participate, and in their own unique ways, like we each have different gifts to give, like y'all both were touching on. But that's like an interesting tension that I notice, and that I feel like is important in this conversation, because there's like the nurturing, the little gestating, it's like an egg or a cocoon, like, so that something, when it's in this place where it's not fully formed, can be protected and not just devoured, because it's not enough to nourish everybody. What each three of us have experienced is tiny for the world. So yeah, I'm curious, like, what y'all, if you've experienced that, and like how we walk with that as folks. I know all three of us with big hearts that do want to share this beyond like our friends and family and the people that we personally know.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Oh, thanks for opening that up. Yeah, I mean, I feel the pain of that on the daily, honestly. Because it's really intense living in a place that's labeled an intentional community. So it's like advertising, this could be yours too, in this really overt way. And so we've been really working with like, just being more intentional and maybe proactive of helping to seed what is living here in the people who come, so they can bring it back to their respective communities. Because it's there is something here, like you said, there's a taste of something, like, oh yeah, that's what I've been looking for, that's what I'm wanting, and maybe this is my people, my place, and maybe it is, but I mean, this is a small valley, it cannot fit everyone. And so just to, I love that Paul Karan, one of Earth Haven's founders, will often say, like, people come to Earth Haven thinking it's the parent, and that we as these little children of the earth are coming to receive the thing from the parent that we didn't get before. And so we unintentionally, and so, innocently most of the time, and preciously, are like wanting to get our unmet needs met. And he's very clear that Earth Haven, or Earth Haven, this vision, this experiment, of which it's just one of many that, around the world, that's aiming to create some fruits from, is the child, and that we're all the parents of it. And so it's barely existing. It's just got a little bit of topsoil. It's one generation into this multi-generational plan. And so there is a fragility to it, particularly when it's up against this huge rushing river of culture, that's so sweeping in the downstream direction, and we're like trying to creep upstream. And so just like, really, I love that you're speaking to something that is also felt here, of there's something we're trying to steward and usher forward through a lot of odds, and we're not trying to be exclusive with it, and we fail all the time, and forgetting how to treat you with as much respect as we do as this precious thing. And so how can we hold the humanity and compassion of those who are coming through and longing and wanting as well, and deserve, and hopefully will cultivate and be with and get as well. And I think that's maybe where this notion of Earth Haven, quote unquote, being a name on this thing over here, Paul will also say Earth Haven's like what will be. Like, Earth Haven doesn't exist yet. And so just that it's just what is right now. It's like we're failing all the time. We're aiming towards the great turning, and we're in the great unraveling. And I mean, it's interesting. I think you asked the question, Chloe, what does grief have to do with belonging? And I think we're getting to the heart of that, it's so painful. So I'd love to unpack that question more, but I just also want to give Siobhan some space. Thanks for hearing that and touching my heart on what's really hard to be on both ends of.
I so just hearing about your experience up at Earth Haven and what the founder had shared at the beginning, and it's something that I work with a lot, Chloe, because I feel like there is such a hunger, such an intense hunger, and it's that's, I think, part of what I was talking about in the beginning with extractive culture. People, it's about me. It's like, what I want, this culture. You have something that I want, and so I'm the entitlement. I'm going to take it. And I feel like what you said, NikiAnne, and also what you said, Chloe, is that it's fragile. What it is that we're creating. It's like these tiny babies, and it's like, or like a spring. You don't just show everybody everything, because it'll just be trampled. It'll by this fast rushing river of hunger. It'll just be eaten up. And so how to have the discernment and the real boundaries of what we share and what we don't share, and how, like, what is the most important thing? It's actually not about us, and it's not about these people that are hungry and need it. Yes, we want to feed them, and we want to feed us. And yes, there is that holding, but what is most important is actually sustaining the thing. That it's like not about us. It's about actually building a new culture. And that is just this tiny little seed. And so holding that as the most important thing, beyond the, like, desires and longing of everyone else, and that hunger that's out there. It's like holding that as the most important thing with compassion, like being able to understand that there is this hunger there with love, but that the most important thing is not being nice, and inviting everyone, and in being so inclusive, that the most important thing is actually that this thing survives. And that's not easy for something so, like, just like a tender little sprout, that 10 years, like you said, Chloe, or even 30 years, NikiAnne, like these, like, you're the founder, even 30 years later, saying like, we don't even know what Earth Haven is yet, because it's still becoming what it's going to become. So the most important thing is actually building that, like cultivating that seed, cultivating that plant that is Earth Haven, that is the Barnardsville community. And like, what is the fertile soil, that plant needs? And maybe it feels like the other word that like pops in is dispersal. Like, if there's too many people, too many energies, it just disperses. If there's too much water, if there's too much, it's that really delicate tending and attention to the bigger conversations that's happening, that I feel like gets lost. And then oftentimes things do sweep away in the river, and you think that was a good idea, but it didn't work. Why? And I think sometimes it is, for these like little conversations about, but we were being so nice. We wanted to, be welcoming, and, wanted people to belong. And that brings me back to that word belonging. Like, it's about belonging to ourself and belonging to this world, in my idea of that world. And in that belonging to ourself and belonging to this world that we are woven into, the trees and the plants, that we just inherently belong. That's kind of the foundation of our existence, is that we belong.
I think about, like, I am I grow plants often, a lot. That's been a big part of my life, agriculture and gardening. And I just think a lot about the people who co-evolve with the seeds that I plant now. And like with something like corn or beans or a plant where we like the food part and the seed part is the same, to have the long view, if you're hungry, to not eat the seeds and plant them, and trust that, like, if I don't eat like 2 or 3 ears of corn, for example, dry corn, that's enough. 2 or 3 big nice ears of corn is enough to plant a fairly large field of corn. I mean, corn is such a beautiful teacher of so many things, but particularly like just the generosity and the generative long view, and the power of patience, like, wow, even if I'm hungry, if I plant these, how many more mouths can this feed? And just as we're talking about, that just feels like such a beautiful mirror in the living world of what we're talking about. That's so tangible, like if you've ever grown corn, it's like, whoa, it really grows quickly, it really feeds a lot of people. And there has to be that patience and that, like, looking at the long view.
I was loving that you were bringing in the seeds, both of you. And Siobhan, you were saying, there's this hazard of having maybe dispersal in a way that's not useful. But then I also think of the dispersal way it's useful. And that's kind of what I'm playing with, or we're playing with here at Earth Haven, is like, how do we disperse the seeds that we know have grown well here in this soil, socially, physically? I'm playing with words here. So that others can figure out what works in their community, in their family, in their bioregion. And so that's actually what I've been playing with, this held space that in this moment is being called the Remembering Retreat. But the idea came through with a lot of people coming through here at Earth Haven, whether they're coming to a program through soil to just experience something, get exposed, get inspired, or really shop around for a new place for home. Either way, I just saw the capacity for so many folks to go so deep. I mean, in such a short amount of time, whether it's a weekend or a week, the level of authenticity and vulnerability and connections and like liberated life energy, like people's vitality. They were reporting like, wow, I just haven't laughed this much in so long, or wow, I haven't cried in a group ever, or I haven't cried in 25 years. I mean, just like the stories can go on and on of like breaking through these layers of protection and disconnection, and dissatisfaction and heartache, and experiencing something on the other side of that: joy, vitality, connection, a sense of belonging, feeling their own true nature come through, and again, short order. And so with that, this remembering retreat emerged to be a space that's not about Earth Haven, but it's really about cultivating our own sense of belonging and home from the inside out. And it's like with that overt purpose, just knowing that people know what they want at that point, when they enough to be like, I'm willing to show up to the space in which you're saying grief is one of the central components. Grieving together, what are you talking about? I don't do that. We don't do that in this country, or in my family, or I don't. And so, and just watching. I love, Siobhan, you've said the word pilgrimage before, a grief pilgrimage or a soul pilgrimage. And just that I think of the shape of a spiral in that, as we go to the center of ourselves. And maybe it's parts we haven't touched in a long time, or maybe not in this life because it's been too hard or scary. We haven't been supported to. And just in a trusting place, and a place that's feeling safe enough to like get into some tender territory. And just like, wow, like just the emergence, the what's coming through as, again, just life energy, just connection, and that people are connecting the dots pretty fast on like, oh, this is how we got there, through this and this. We were out in nature, like you asked a question and I partnered with someone, and they were authentically listening to me, and having eye contact, like things that in my world now don't feel that revolutionary, but are, like you said, cultural isolation or deficit. So I'm just, I guess all this is to say, like, I'm just loving getting more clear that this is where I can be at service, at least in this place of cultural repair, or moving towards that thing that it's hard to name, that's bigger than myself, that feels holy. Yeah. I'm kind of curious, like I mentioned grief in there, and like I know we've kind of shared grief spaces together, and like what would you describe your relationship to grief, or what grief to be in the world, that's maybe not so scary or ugly, or something to avoid?
One of the ways to hold it is through this imagery. And so sometimes I'll story grief as a wolf that is like roaming, this wild wolf that roams my inner landscape, that's deep down in what I would say is soul territory. And that the dominant culture wants to cage the wolf, kill the wolf, ignore the wolf, starve the wolf, and that it feels more relevant to me to let the wolf be wild, let the wolf be the wild being that it is, and tracking the wolf, noticing how the wolf brushes up against you and when, and then also howling with the wolf when the wolf howls, like just really having that kind of reimagining the relationship with the wolf. And it reminds me always of the reintroduction of the wolf in Yellowstone, and how when they reintroduced the wolf, that all the river systems came back. And so feeling that in my own body of the real like health of the entire ecosystem being tended by the wildness of the wolf, and not the domestication of the wolf, or trying to formulate it, or trying to, put it in some sort of even box of understanding, because grief is messy and grief is wild, and there's not really a formula. But for me, that storying of it supports the just renewal of a relationship that feels generative with grief.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that imagery of the wolf. And yeah, for me, there's other layers of imagery around like natural cycles, the cycles that happen around us and within us. And I think often of birds, and, I don't know if it's all birds, but most birds molt and grow new feathers periodically. And you see a bird, usually birds are looking pretty good. Like they're looking pretty clean and together. They preen themselves. Like they're not looking really like unkempt very often. You don't see a lot of unkempt birds. And if birds never lost, if they just had the same feathers throughout their lives, they would be looking ragged. The feathers do their job, and they're flying and they're doing whatever they're doing, and they drop them and they grow new ones. And that's part of how they can be so, like dapper and beautiful and shimmery is they're constantly renewing. And I look at the trees here in our beautiful deciduous forests and think about, the cycles of renewal in female bodies with the moon. And it's just like such a natural part of life to have this cycle of shedding and renewal. And grief, I like sort of the merger of our images, because grief is not as predictable as some of those cycles, in my experience, at least. Wolves maybe are more predictable than we mythologize them to be, but they can kind of show up and surprise you. Grief can kind of, for me, certainly show up and surprise me, but there's a solace in relating to it in a cyclic way, because I think some people, and I've seen this in grief rituals, people are like, okay, I'm here, like I had this really hard thing and I'm here to grieve about it and like get it over with, I'm going to grieve it out. And it's like, well, like, great that you're here, and like you're not going to be done with it at the end of this workshop, or at the end of this day, or even probably at the end of this lifetime. It's like part of being a human, part of being alive is that cycle of shedding and renewal. And part of remaining beautiful, part of like giving space to grow new shimmery feathers. And it's not so cut and dry and so binary as that. I don't see grief as like a negative thing or just a shedding. It's like also a deepening. But yeah, that's the imagery that comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love, there's an ancestor in my life that you all actually know, Kimchi. And she'd talk about the villagers in here. She's like, oh, the villagers are so loud in me today. She's just talking about all the voices in her, or that she's, relating to. And I think of as grief. It's just like, oh, it's one of those friends. Like, how can we have just this relating, like befriending grief, and have it be someone, and maybe people, maybe I at moments aren't ready to call it a friend, but like, I see you, I know you exist. Okay, we're relating in a way, we're acknowledging each other, maybe when it's too intense. But just, I love that, through Martine's work and Saban Fu's and so many people that I would call teachers, for me is, in our culture today, people are talking about gratitude and love all the time. And just that it's been storied that, well, grief is that expression of love. It's, if gratitude is the thing that we have for the things we love, then grief is our expression of love for the things we've lost or never had. And for me, that just puts it in such a sweet, accessible way that, that just feels relatable. And so I've appreciated people who've been able to just put some handle on it, given that it's so wild, unwieldy, ever-changing, and lifelong. And I think Siobhan, in that conversation we had in the summer, just recognizing like that, yeah, so much of our relationship with grief ritual and grief work is this acknowledgement that it's not something to be removed. And I mean, you just said that, Chloe, that, you know, we're ever with it, and that it's, but how do we dance with it in a way that it's part of our life and we're still vibrant or functioning or moving, transforming.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like it's so important, like that grief walks with us, you know, that piece that we talked about last summer. And a lot of this like kind of languaging around grief right now is that we somehow like get rid of grief or get over it, I hear, and or that that there's like this release of grief. And I feel like if grief is love, you know, if grief is praise, then like it's like how do we be in relationship with that as a very generative expression of our humanity, and like you were saying, Chloe, like a cyclical expression. So like I feel like we are very constructed to be summer people, like always happy and healthy and vital and joyful. And so whenever we are in a winter of ourself, you know, or even a dark night, you know, it's like always day. And so whenever we're touching these other places inside of ourselves, there's this idea that there's something wrong. And then we have to like get rid of it, get back to our, and I think it goes back to the culture that we live in, and get back to our productive, efficient, effective, rational, linear lives, and just keep trucking right along the hamster wheel. And it's so deep within us, and even within me, I can feel that those places inside of me. And it's surreal. I think I was most likely brought into doing grief work because I need it. I need to fully embrace and soften, I would say, into understanding the wisdom teachings of winter and the dark night, and like into my feeling body, being able to fully feel those, the seasonality, the cyclical, the shedding and renewal, the mythic arcs that we are on as humans. And so I think part of the grief work right now is really about relationship, like a relationship with the full spectrum and the wisdom teachings of the full spectrum of our cyclical nature as humans, and creating generative relationships for all of those places that we might find ourselves, that we will find ourselves as humans.
Yeah. I want to add to that, like the relationality among people grieving together, which like I am a very sensitive person. Like I imagine my heart as like having a really big, nice, warm, welcoming foyer with like snacks, and it's like fairly nice there, and it's open doors. But then like there's inner parts of it that are a lot less accessible to most people. Like I feel very open on a certain level of depth of emotion and being witnessed and expressing a certain level of emotion. And then the very, very deep parts are actually pretty challenging for me to share with other people. Like often I cry when I'm alone. It's hard for me to cry around other people. And I've found it can be a really tender edge, but also a really fruitful place to access those realms of grief in relationship with other humans, particularly like people of all bodies and beings, but specifically humans. And to me, the way that I have felt it in those spaces is like, I'm like grief as a liquid, grief as like a form of water. And I'm pouring we're each coming with our vessel and pouring a little bit in, and together there creates this momentum. The stream is like powerful enough to really carry the process of grieving and shedding and the renewal that comes with that. to be in completion for that moment, as we've been talking about, it's like a cyclical thing, it's a wave thing, it's not like then we're done with it, but there's a momentum and kind of like an out of controlness almost that is really beneficial that I've experienced in sharing grief in community spaces. Like it's not as calibrated. It's like, okay, we're like going, I'm being carried by this wave of grief that everybody's contributing to, and I'm being carried into a deeper place of wildness and mystery and pain and pleasure and beauty and sorrow that I would just on my own. And I just feel like that kind of loops back around to what we were talking about with this sense of community and belonging and the little village sprouts and that grieving specifically together with other people being such an important part of that building, growing, tending, dreaming that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Chloe, for speaking to the medicine of a medicine of togetherness, of community, of witness. And yeah, I just appreciate you're like, I had a vision and an image of what that looked like and felt like. I almost had I had a remembrance of being in some of those spaces together. So thank you. And yeah, it's also bringing me to just acknowledge that it's like a very far out edge that's not always passable for some, and that it can be like a a slingshot, or like something like it bounces back, or like it just like it snaps and then it comes back, where people are really close to feeling something and going there, and then they can't, and then there's a contraction that can happen. And just wanting to name that, like, that's also welcome. We're working with that in a space. Like, there's no way to be like, oh, you've accomplished, you did it right. You grieved, you had tears in your eyes. And for those who maybe the idea feels really wild and scary to come together at all. Don't even mention grieving, but just to be in a circle or like a container. And just we're all, as facilitators, us as co-participants, we're all doing our best to like really honor wherever we are. Mm-hmm. And I've experienced so much grace and in these group settings, and then I've mostly hearing about and seeing that there's still a coming together, even if we're not expressing it similarly. And that the word touched came through for me, of like, you were describing this being moved, and you're even through the emotionality or through the expression of others, and it's just moving you a little bit. It's like, yeah, it's like, even if I'm feeling solid as a rock and that river flowing, like I'm being touched by the water coming by. And just that we're working with all that, and all that's perfect. Like there's no place to arrive, like you said. And so just really wanted to make that be totally clear, if it hasn't already been named explicitly in this conversation, but all is welcome and all is perfect. So, and that's the aim, and that's the dance we're trying to co-create together.
Well, I just want to offer some gratitude for this vision and for this invitation to come together as women and weave stories, share stories, and in some small way, I feel like that is cultural renewal, is just coming together and visioning what it can be like, and feeling into what is happening for each of us in our own communities, and what is possible. One last thing that I wanted to say about grief, if I can just go thread back there real quick, is that I feel like just creating a ritual container that is strong enough, a strong enough vessel. Like, you don't even have to call it grief work. Like, grief shows up in those containers that are held well. Like, grief is so there for all of us. And so whether it's a song circle or a story share, or any well-held container, most likely there is grief there. And so how do we tend? How do we tend, whether we're calling it grief work or not? I feel like is part of like the literacy that I see blossoming in communities all over the country.
Yeah, just also gratitude and appreciation for both of you and creating this space to share. And yeah, it feels fortifying to me in my little tiny but beautiful role that I have to play in this grand and seemingly impossible vision of healing for humans and everybody else. So thank you for that fortification.
Blessings.